Welcome to the Indie Women Podcast, where we introduce you to the fearless women taking their filmmaking careers into their own hands, showing you how indie films get made. And here's your host, Heather Turman.
Hello, and welcome to the Indie Women Podcast, a show dedicated to the women in the indie film world who have found success bringing their projects to life on their own terms. I'm your host, Heather Turman. And as always, I'm super jazzed about bringing this show to you guys. I really hope you've been finding the episodes enjoyable and inspirational. This week, I have a really informative episode all about film school. And I know in indie film, that's sort of that's one of those things that's hotly debated, whether or not one should go and whether or not you get anything out of it, what you get out of it. So this week I sat down with Danni McClellan. She's a native Detroiter like myself who made the move to Los Angeles after getting into the master's film program at Chapman University. And so in addition to discussing her entry film and her thesis project, she and I discussed the ongoing debate of whether or not one should go to film school, what she's gotten out of it, and how the experience has changed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. As you can imagine, a discipline as hands-on as film certainly changes when everything switches to remote. So we do a deep dive into all that. And if you are a budding filmmaker on the fence about whether or not you should attend film school, you definitely don't want to miss this very informative episode. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Danni McClellan. Well, hello, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm so happy to have you here, Danni McClellan. Danni from Detroit.
Yes.
Which I love because I'm a Detroit native myself.
Yep.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show. We fell into each other's sphere due to, like you mentioned, screenwriting, Twitter, and another indie women alum, Sarah Ann Massey. So always lovely to connect.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to just dive right into and hear how you got your start in film.
I had a really unique start. And that's why it's so much fun for me to talk about, honestly. I unlike most of my classmates in the 2021 graduating class of directors from Chapman, I've been in this business for 12 years now, almost 13. I've always wanted to be in film. I was absolutely that kid. Didn't realize that it was kind of weird as a child that I was constantly like trying to instigate like little scripts and plays and things with my friends. I thought that was just how everybody played.
Sure.
And I was always taking over and always writing scripts, always doing stuff. And so I got really lucky, basically. I am the epitome of luck. I started undergrad a little bit late because I grew up with chronic illnesses, and it was exactly when the Michigan film tax incentive started.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like truly the luckiest of circumstances. Like how did that wind up lining up so perfectly?
It's such a short window too.
Exactly. So I was an undergrad at U of M Dearborn.
Okay.
And very, very tiny. At the time, it wasn't even a film program. Technically, it's a communications degree. And with like a sub-discipline of journalism and screen studies smashed together. And my very first time I was working on a feature, actually, I'm wrong because I always forget about my friends growing up. My camp counselor tried to make a like do-it-yourself on the weekend shooting a feature when I was like 18.
Oh, wow.
And so I worked on that. Technically, if we want to go back that far, like, I don't want to do the math. I'm 35. I was 18 working on this like bootstrapped,
sure,
call in favor shoot on the weekend. It did get finished though. And like, that's kind of cool. So I knew that model of filmmaking existed.
Yeah.
Which I feel like most kids in 2004 had no idea.
Right.
So even before I was in school, like I was still learning constantly about film. I always joke with friends, like I was learning about film when I was watching Dawson's Creek, because that's what he did all the time. And you saw Jen being his producer and his AD, and like, you saw the behind the scenes, you saw his internship. So I was always kind of preparing myself for lightning to strike. And so when the tax incentive came,
of course it's starting. Hang on one second.
I made a grave mistake.
You guys are doing good though. Proud of you.
I sincerely apologize. I made a grave mistake and closed my door. And of course my dog was like,
Of
I
course.
want to go out and get water. Okay.
Yeah, that's why we're doing this instead of my like real life background, is in case they get ridiculous.
Sure. So sorry. So you were, Dawson's Creek, you knew that existed.
Yeah. And I think my first like real feature was through my undergrad professor who had met some director at Cannes like years before, and the director was from Michigan, the tax incentive was started, and everything was really hot. And this director came and gave, like a little lecture and like the teaser trailer and stuff before production to the 20 of us in the program, most of whom were not interested in the film industry in any meaningful way. And I jumped on it. I was just like, I'm helping you make this. What do you want me to do? How can I help? And I worked on it. Lo and behold, I wound up even producing the reshoots of it like a year later. And as a happy medium, I got a production coordinator credit on
amazing.
$100,000 horror movie when I was a sophomore in undergrad and like 22 years old. And that kind of led to more things. I just got really tenacious. I really firmly believe that one of the traits that it takes in this industry is just intense curiosity.
Yes.
And so if I wanted to figure out how to get a job, I was, and this is before YouTube was huge. This was 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. YouTube wasn't big, certainly not in the legit, like the mainstream film sense. And then, so I just tried to find everything else. I was going on all the different blogs, and I was going on to like Craigslist, and I found Mandy.com, and I made myself a PA career while I was still in undergrad. Almost flunked out my senior year because I was taking too many PA days.
Sure.
And right after I graduated, I came out here for the first time, kept continuing that education. I'm voracious about learning.
Sure.
I did a program at UCLA called the Professional Producing Program, which is like a little mini certificate version of their producing MFA.
Cool.
Turned out I knew people who were connected to it already, and like it just keeps snowballing. It just kept snowballing, and I got AD jobs really fast because I was organized and good at it. Spoiler, that's a coping mechanism of my ADHD, but like it all kind of worked and jived for me to get up that PA and indie AD food chain really fast.
That's great. Yeah.
I got it, again, it's luck because I happened to be in the city where all these opportunities were. But I also was just like a super nerd my whole life.
Totally. Well, and you were seeking them out in a way too, and I think a lot of people tend to get, either, what's the word? Just intimidated by the experience and being on a real set and getting there. And so, putting yourself up for those jobs to begin with is, it's nerve wracking. It takes a lot.
Yeah.
It takes balls,
I remember being terrified on like that $100,000 indie movie, who the biggest name in it was a very small like day player part from The Girl Next Door.
Okay.
And the character's name is Danny. Like as a teenage girl, I had mixed feelings about the movie, but that was such a big movie when I was in high school. And like, here's this guy who's from Michigan, and he could have been he was that close to being the next like big teen, like young adult star. And he's in this movie I'm on. And I remember being so like awestruck.
Sure.
And, 13 years later, I'm like, oh, you had no idea what was coming. It got so much bigger.
I know, right?
So intimidating. That was like nothing. It's so weird, but it definitely, I think that helped. The fact that I started on really smart projects and eased my way into the business rather than leaping headfirst into being in LA, leaping headfirst into trying to be a PA on like a very, very big budget show, I really kind of eased my way in through these non-union, but still SAG, still a lot of times DGA indie movies, because I got training. And like on the job training, before I even graduated undergrad, I had a key PA job and was trained how to be a second AD and knew how to do a call sheet and a PR and Exhibit G and everything you'd ever need to know paperwork wise with the job. And that was like maybe 18 months after my first movie. So
that's great.
It's kind of wild to think about that timeline looking back.
Totally. Yeah. When you look back, it's always that experience of, oh, I can't believe like I knew this, that, but you have this like, you know, just like a wider perspective of what led to what and how, you know, you kept saying snowball, but yeah, it's like, I always look at it as like planting seeds, and sometimes all of them blossom like at once in a way. And then there's always kind of like a sort of like, it seems like a dry spell or something, but it's really just like, you know, gotta wait for the next crop you've been planting seeds the whole time, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of got complacent because I had so many seeds in the Detroit film industry, and great jobs too. Like I have my DGA book built on second AD, third area jobs. Like I'm, if I wanted to, I could turn it in tomorrow and join the DGA, but the tax incentive left. The tax incentives left, and it left right when I was starting to get really complacent because, you know, ultimately the way Michigan had the tax incentive set up was not as sustainable. And then, you know, change of heads in that state, which also led to the Flint water crisis. It was suddenly gone. You know, the rug was literally ripped out from under thousands of those of us who were working either union or non-union. But for me, you know, at that point, I had been in the industry for 4 or 5 years. I had worked on a ton of good stuff with really great directors and great cast and great crew. And everyone left. Yeah. And I was still just there like, well, if I'm going to move, do I really want to pursue a career as an AD? Is that really what I actually want? Because that's a big step to like move your life and start over. And, you know, my family's in Michigan. My parents are getting older, and it was a hard moment there. And I very flippantly told my undergrad mentor, well, I want to apply to grad school. I want to start writing again. And I was just going to go to like Wayne State in Detroit, get an MA in creative writing, and just see what happened. Yeah. And by that time I had it's like a virus amongst PAs, honestly, of just like, you start at a certain point because you've been told so many times, nobody cares what your goals are, just go do your job. And everyone wants to be a director. So like, you know, even as an AD, I'd always encourage kids that came in who wanted to PA for me if they wanted to be directors. And I would give them the advice. If that's what you want to do, stop taking jobs with me, go get a day job and make things. That's what directors do.
100%.
And I never let myself want that for myself. But my career was gone. So I had to look at it again. And my professor kind of blackmailed me and said, if you're applying to this, like, you know, small local creative writing program, I will not write a letter of recommendation for you unless you apply to 3, like top 10, top 15 film schools too.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, the ultimate kick in the ass.
That. Yeah. To have that sort of mentor who was like, why are you selling yourself short? Yeah. You know? So that then was your decision. That's how you decided to make the choice to go to Chapman, to go to film school.
Yeah. And this is the part that I really want to be transparent about, even though it's like a little hard for me. I didn't figure it out the first time. Like, I applied for 2 years to screenwriting programs.
Okay.
Great programs. I got interviews. I got wait lists. I did some really great workshops in between. I did a TV writing intensive at Columbia in New York, which was the most incredible summer I've probably ever had off of set. I made great friends there, and they were the ones who kicked me in the ass and said, okay, like, we get it. You like writing, but you love being on set. What are you doing trying to sit in a room and write alone? Like, that's not who you are. Go direct your own short. And that was how I made Heads Tails.
Cool. Yeah. And which I love, because that was in Detroit, right?
Yep.
Okay.
We shot that in Wyandotte.
Okay, cool. Because just like the house, the style of house, and of course the weather. But and so that was really great. And you, and that was what got you into Chapman.
Yep.
Cool.
So the third year, I finally applied as a director. I only applied to Chapman and one other school. And the second I interviewed at Chapman and met the head of the directing discipline, and we had a really transparent conversation, because they knew coming in that I knew the business, and that my expectations and my goals were going to be a little bit different than some of my classmates because of that. And that I would be really picky about where I went. But they really liked me and they wanted to have me. And it was a very enlightening year, because I had spent so much time researching in terms of, like, what programs offer you to retain your rights to your own films.
Yeah, that's
Chapman
huge.
does that.
Cool.
Really important. Who is a conservatory and a collaborative place? Are you guaranteed that you're even going to direct a thesis film? A lot of schools, you're in a lottery. They admit more students than are allowed to actually direct thesis films or other projects. And I didn't want to go to a blanket production program. I wanted to study directing. And Chapman had all of that. But the thing that I couldn't account for until I was actually there and interviewing was how different the culture is.
Yeah.
Film schools, people are kind of glib about it and say, like, oh, they have a bad culture. It's kind of toxic and competitive. It's a lot worse than people make it out to be. The same way it is on set. Set can be a lot more toxic than, sometimes we kind of brush it aside or under the rug, and film schools are the same way.
Yeah.
Chapman's still competitive. We have a very low admittance rate. It's really hard to get in. They only admit 18 directors, and my year has only 17 of us.
Wow.
But we're a family.
Oh, sure.
We like any other grouping of young adults, some conflicts and things can arise, but it doesn't come from a place of, well, if I don't get this thing and someone else gets it, then that's like a slight against me.
Right.
There's no backstabbing. There's no like malicious undercutting of each other. A lot of our faculty has worked at other film schools, and they tell us stories about why they don't work at those schools anymore. And a lot of it comes down to the vicious cutthroat culture that gets a pass. And we're really encouraged to not be that way. We're really encouraged to collaborate and be a family.
Which is excellent, because this industry, your peers are the people who are going to, go to bat for you, like as you move forward, like a rising tide, lifts many ships or whatever. It's that thing of like a success for one person that, is most likely going to lead to more success for you, if you're like a good person and treat everybody with that kind of respect and are excited for other people's wins. So that's cool that they tend to. I had another Chapman alum on, Sassy Moen.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she had her experience, the one thing that she sort of had, the program was great, but they were trying to discourage her feature, because her feature they thought was too big for her to do, which on one hand, like, you can appreciate like a school saying like, hold on, like we want you to get the best product possible, so let's try to scale it back. but she ended up doing the feature and turning it into a profitable endeavor, because like you said, like you know, getting to keep the rights to your work, which is huge for any film school.
Yeah.
So that's really excellent. So but you mentioned now, like you've been in the program like during COVID. So
yeah,
like how has that been? Is it a lot less hands-on than other school that, you know, like what are the challenges? Because I'm sure you had to shoot your thesis and such during this.
Yes. So the first thing that happened, I'm high risk for my dynamic disabilities and chronic illnesses. I stopped going to school about 2 weeks before campus actually shut down. And one of our academic deans was teaching my thesis class, my prep class. So this would have been spring semester 2020. And it was really smart because he got to use me as a test case for starting to do things remotely. So I inadvertently became part of how Chapman figured out how to do things over Zoom. There was discussions about doing things hybrid at one point, and obviously, you know, things just were constantly evolving. That by far was the most stressful part of it, was things constantly evolving and this constant push and pull between, they wanted us to be safe, but they also wanted to enable us to make our films and to not have us stuck there. And I'm really, really proud of Chapman's now being a top 5 film school, because a big part of that is how they handled COVID. I don't think it was perfect. There's things that I definitely would have done differently coming from an AD background, and also having worked at my undergrad program. That was my day job right before I came out here for Chapman. So I kind of know both. I know all 3 sides that were kind of into working at the same time. I'm a graduate student. I've been staff at a university, and I know the industry from being an AD. And there was no perfect solution, especially because things kept changing. And like I said, that was the biggest stress, especially for me, was just not knowing. And it made a lot of other students very, very concerned about, like, is their money being well spent? And there was a lot of controversy at all the film schools. And I remember there being a few folks who elsewhere had tried to launch lawsuits and saying that virtual learning wasn't good enough. And I'm not going to lie, I was offended. As someone with chronic illness, that accessibility is really important.
Yeah.
And it became a great thing for me. And as it has for a lot of other people who are dealing with virtual writers' rooms, and you know, it's great to have it as an option. And so it really upset me when people were saying that they were no longer getting a high quality education because it was virtual.
Sure.
Now the hiccups in getting it set up and enabling teachers and educating everyone on how to use the new technology, making the best use of the technology, and like changing things, that's obviously was bumpy. And I agree it could have been done a lot better. These are a lot, like, having the ability to do things over virtual Zoom or whatever other platform is something that schools should have been doing for a long time. The technology's been there. And so that part of it was really frustrating, because for a while it didn't feel like we were getting everything we could out of it, but I knew that we could get more.
Sure.
And eventually that wound up working out really nicely, in my opinion, for our directing workshops. Typically during our final year at Chapman, we're structured a little bit differently than some other schools and other conservatories. Our first 2 years are all of our actual coursework, our workshops, our production classes, some film studies classes that bring everyone from the different disciplines together. So we only had like a semester of having to deal with those kinds of things over Zoom. And that's more academic. It translates relatively easily. The biggest challenge was the workshops where you're actually working with actors.
Yeah.
And I dropped that class in spring 2020 because I just felt it was the best thing for my mental health. I was really overloaded. I had a lot of support from the faculty in making that choice. And, you know, we knew that because third year is primarily thesis only,
Yeah.
I would have a little bit of space to make it up. So that's what I wound up doing. And I did that workshop class in the fall 2020 instead of spring.
Sure.
And by the time that happened, it was so second nature for most people.
People we adapt quickly. Human beings adapt quickly.
Yes, exactly. And it's still definitely weird. A lot of those workshops, what happens in them is you pick a scene from a movie, a TV show, a play, and you have some sort of objective related to it, and that's why you're choosing to film it. So I'm a big TV person. Like,
sure.
I, chronically ill kid, you fall in love with TV, I think, every time. And one of my favorite shows for the last couple of years has been Ted Lasso. So I did Ted Lasso scene that's supposed to take place out on a soccer pitch. And we did it over Zoom, and we had to record it, edit it, and you're trying to replicate somewhat the shots that you think would be used in this scene. So it was a lot of imagination, but ultimately I think it really helped because it made me prep things in a different way than I normally would. And it made me get a lot better at doing overhead drawings and being able to visualize things in a way that muscle had never really been tugged on to that extreme before. So for me, I feel like that was a great learning experience. And you're still working with actors. Yeah. You're still, creating performances and developing characters and story together. So is there something lost? Yes, totally. But when it comes to learning the fundamentals when you're in school and getting the muscle memory of what you need to do to get a day done, get a scene done, it's kind of perfect.
Sure.
Because it's already changing the sandbox and making you adaptable.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like you said, it's sort of that overhead view. And they say this I've heard this a lot, and I feel like, especially in indie film, it's true that like, sometimes it's a blessing when you have a low budget, right? Yes, because you get, it makes you exercise creativity a lot more, And so I feel like what you're saying is sort of that same thing, like, given these insane circumstances and these unprecedented circumstances, well, if you get to, you pull out the creativity chops and you get an exercise in that, in addition to everything else you're working on, which is really great, Yeah.
So in other than like me personally pushing a class back, all of our films got pushed. Not just students in thesis year, but second years, first years. And I think there's like 1,000 undergrads, not to mention documentary programs, TV, Chapman has a wide variety of majors and programs for grad school. So everything got pushed for safety. And originally when we shut down, the goal was to be shooting, just a couple of months later. Yeah. Well, that turned into a single, basically not a single film started shooting until February of this year.
Yeah.
Which also dramatically cuts down on our post-production time.
Yeah. Right.
And that was why I chose Chapman, was having the ability to focus on only thesis for an entire year and not have the pressures of other classes and workshops. My personal body could not physically handle dealing with classes and thesis at the same time. And I don't think it's healthy for most people either in terms of the stress and the workload. It sets up some bad habits in terms of,
just trying
conversations we're having about the rest of the industry in terms of workload and the hours that you spend on things. So it wound up still all kind of working out because we didn't shoot until February. Nobody shot until February. I shot in June. So that created an entire other set of difficulties because the spring semester was over. I had no adult supervision. That was kind of like my joke of I just kind of had to go do it all myself with my producer and my wonderful teammates. But we didn't have that typical guidance and oversight. And that's something that myself and a small group of us who didn't shoot until May, June, really kind of got left out in the wild. And that's something that absolutely could have been prevented in terms of our mentorship. But the institutional support has always been really, really strong from Chapman throughout COVID. We got an additional budgetary allotment for COVID supplies, as well as COVID officers. They created a Dodge College set of white pages, very similar to the industry ones and based off the industry ones. We have a campus COVID compliance officer in addition to our amazing production manager. He's one of my favorite people on the whole campus. We used to hang out and chat in his office with a coffee about like our old commercial days being AD and production manager. It was always really nice. So we had really great institutional support, but the thing that I wound up kind of missing and having to make up for on my own was the creative support, the mentorship, and that was a little trying for me personally, because that was the whole point in me coming to Chapman. So shooting in the summer, going through posts in the summer, we picture locked almost a week ago.
It's amazing.
I'm considering how long this road has been. It's incredible to be at the end of it, but also very nerve-wracking. Like I keep looking at my date on my computer because it's like, okay, so I have 11 days to finish VFX and 2D animation and color and sound to make our delivery.
Which is so, I mean, that's gnarly in and of it. I mean, that's really gnarly. I will say to listeners, I had a chance to view the unfinished version now, and it's excellent. And I'm so excited for you. I love it. And when COVID happened and you realized that things were getting pushed, did that change your concept for the thesis at all? Did you aim to write, because there's two characters really? Yeah. So it's like, did you aim to do something with like a smaller cast initially, or was that brought on by COVID?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So the story that's in my finished getting out of myself, in my finished thesis, Otis, that was always the end of the film. That was ultimately where my thesis was always going to end up. Originally, there's a massive cross-country road trip back to Michigan where my lead character, Dorothy, she's on a mission to dig up the ashes of her dead dog because she's feeling very lonely. The longer version had it much more fleshed out about why she was feeling lonely. She's gone through a breakup. A lot of people tried to say she was codependent. That wasn't it, but she was very like emotionally attached to things and could not function with change. And I think there's a real fear that I had in my late 20s, and even a couple of years ago of, actually, let's be honest, even pre-COVID, of being alone with myself. Because when you're stuck alone with yourself, like,
yeah, you can't hide from yourself.
You can't hide. You can't hide from all these different things you've built up and all these issues. So I really wanted to take that character on that journey of figuring out how to be alone. Which then when COVID hit, I was like, okay, so this accidentally just became a lot more relevant to people. But how do I make it COVID safe? Sure. How do I make myself feel comfortable? If I always think of like, because I am high risk, because I live with dynamic disabilities that cause a lot of physical pain and chronic fatigue, I'm always thinking of like, if I can't handle this situation, then I'm not going to push myself, and that will help protect other people. I'm very protective of especially my peers at Chapman, because I want to make sure they're going into the industry. Even if I'm the only person they're exposed to that's been a PA and an AD, I want them to know that there's certain behaviors that are unacceptable, and to know like how to draw that line and what's okay and what's not okay, because so much of what they're going to get thrown into is really not okay. both in terms of work hours, toxic environments, abusive bosses that just,
Yes.
are emotionally manipulative, all the things, all the things.
But especially work hour, I mean, all of it. I think COVID in general did shine a light on
Absolutely.
on, what we were asking people to do, what people were expected to do. And like, it was just so normal. It's like, 17 hours on set. And that's like a normal day. Like, it's, you know what I mean? That's just crazy. But
yeah. I mean, I remember all the times as a PA, we'd sit there and like almost brag, like, what's your longest work week? Mine's 105. Like, that's not normal. That's not normal. And very smartly, a lot of the restrictions that Chapman made for COVID were based around making the set more manageable. So shorter hours, fewer crew, no location moves, like company location moves.
Of course.
Limits on the number of casts at a given time. You had to appeal and apply if you wanted to use a child actor. Even though my film does have a child character in it, I never planned on her being played by a child, so it was kind of easy for me.
Sure.
Gotta love magical realism. It really just kind of like simplifies things for my AD side of my brain sometimes. So to me, a lot of those things I was grateful for, because I was worried about, film schools can sometimes feel like the Wild West.
Yeah.
Of not having enough protocols in place to make sure that students are doing things safely and wisely, because they don't have the knowledge or the context, unless you're telling them to do these things, to make sure it's there. So, and this is kind of like my favorite example of this at Chapman. And I hope the change they made continues. Prior to COVID, there was no production rule about having a bathroom with running water on set, or how many you needed based on how many crew and cast were there.
So interesting. Yeah.
And to me as an AD, that's the first thing you look for in a location scout.
Yeah. Where are people going to go to the bathroom? Yeah.
Right. So unbeknownst to me, there have been many films over the years that, including amongst some of my friends, where like there were very substandard, a porta-john and a hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
Which, sometimes if you're on location,
you got to do what you got to do.
Of course, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
But if you're filming in a house,
yes,
and you've got 25 crew members going in and out of it, and there's one bathroom, what do you think's going to happen? Well, you're not thinking about those things.
Yeah, it's going to hold up production so much too, outside of the safety, outside of everything else. Yeah. Think about a line and how long that's going to hold. Exactly. I mean, it just, you try to cheap out, it costs you more.
Yes. And there's so many other things that students are learning, whether they're in the producing program, who they act as our line producers, our UPMs, our creative producers. There are location scouts, they do everything for us. Bless.
Which is like
Ibanez was my producer at Chapman. All of you out there listening, hire him. He's amazing. But he, he, like me, has a background in some film industry stuff. But if you're coming into these programs straight out of undergrad, you've maybe never even lived outside of a dorm before.
Yeah.
How can you be expected to think through these like very logistical things when you might be learning how to read a call sheet? You might still be figuring out how to pay your bills for the first time. Yeah. And then you add on the stress of all these additional things with COVID. It was very jarring to suddenly have much more strict regulations. We lost shooting days. They cut our shooting days almost in half.
Oh, man.
They limited us to, by the time I shot, they had eased back on a couple of things. One of which was I got like 2 extra crew members on set, which was nice because it meant we could have a PA.
Yeah. I mean, it makes a difference. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. Two additional bodies. Yeah.
But at the same time, when it's a student film, you want to make sure things are very lean, because that's fewer issues to manage. So it's really this constant pull and tug of our ambitions, our budgets, and what's actually safe and reasonable and practical. And I'm always the person that's going to lean towards safe, reasonable, and practical. And that's how we went from a road trip movie across the country to a woman breaking into a house and meeting a child.
Well, I love the, I mean, I feel like I didn't get, I don't know what the previous version read like. I don't know that, but I love how this began and how we, there was a natural curiosity of like, what's she doing? Like, is she about to kill someone and bury them? Like, you know what I mean? I thought it was really creative, and I really, really enjoyed that sequence.
Thank you.
Yeah,
that makes me so happy, because that's been one of the hardest things to sell people on is why I need that whole opening sequence of her sneaking into this house. What is that adding to? I was like, well, it's ironic.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like she's going to kill someone.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, and it's just and it just, to be honest, it made the the presence then of the not young girl but the child that much more like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, just to see the sneaking, the getting caught immediately has that many more, that much more stakes, that much more tension. Yeah, I loved it. And I just loved the sequence in and of itself, just because it was, unique and different. And I always love those kinds of things. So
it was so fun to shoot too, because we just got to play superhero for an afternoon.
Yeah.
And my wonderful lead actress, Sprague Graydon,
she's very good. Yeah.
This is how it ties into my PA days too. So she was a cast member on a TV show where I was the base camp PA 7 years ago in Detroit. It was an AMC show. We lasted one season and got canceled, but we've stayed in touch, and I've stayed in touch with a lot of people from that film. One of my other Chapman films actually had another cast member from it in it. So it's really the friendships that I made when I was a PA, just doing my job and being well liked by actors, has really enabled me to do some great casting here. And Sprague is often played like beleaguered mobster wives. That's kind of how she calls it herself. And so getting to do a little bit of comedy with her and doing really fun physical stuff and like, making her land like a superhero and do a bunch of fake digging in a yard. It was really fun for both of us, because we just got to play, and so much of what I think a lot of student films do is they become very talky. Sure. I love talking, and I love writing dialogue. So it was really, really fun to just play in kind of a cartoon world and see what I could do without anyone talking, just following her as she's figuring out how to get into the house.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Like, show, don't tell. But yeah, she was excellent. I mean, when you're talking lower budget stuff and student film stuff, the acting sometimes unfortunately can kill the project, like, because it's difficult, like if somebody's not a professional actor, but she was obviously.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, you in student film and indie film, you get people just who don't have as much experience in front of the camera, and it can be so challenging to pull out believable performances, and sometimes, it's more uneven usually. Like, you'll see, like one scene somebody really delivers, and it's probably the scene that got them the role, you know what I mean?
Yep.
But then there's other scenes that they just, it really doesn't come across natural or believable, and it can kill it. But I was really impressed with the acting in this thesis, because I just feel like performances are paramount to a final product.
I do too. Yeah. I do too. And I think because technology has become so accessible, there's always the joke of like, if you want to shoot a movie, go shoot on your iPhone. You can. Totally. But do you have a good story?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know how to work with actors? Do you even want to? I find a lot of people who come into the film school program completely green. Yeah. Really just knowing about film through their love of watching it.
Yeah.
Or their love of just general storytelling. forget that our primary job as directors is to shepherd a story and shepherd these characters. And that's not just how it looks.
Yes.
It's the performances and the acting. And it's really a shame because I think it's easy to get caught up in all the logistical stuff we've already talked about. It's so distracting as a director. Film schools that function as conservatories put an immense amount of pressure on directors to shepherd their films.
That's right.
We have to do a lot of work beyond what other, a professional director or somebody on a feature or a TV show would have to do. We're really our own producers in conjunction with people from that discipline. And it gets very overwhelming, especially for someone like me, who I know things that my producer doesn't yet.
Right.
So you have to find that balance between stepping in and
and letting them
trusting your
fully,
team. And I think that's really, really hard because so much of what we see in the media is still auteur culture.
Yes.
And that's still, I think, subconsciously in how film schools are running too. Even though it's a conservatory, they emphasize collaboration. They want you to work with the writing program. They want you to collaborate with these people. They want your producer to also be creative. They want you guys to do those things. There's still this nagging, unrelenting weight on our backs that if anything goes wrong with that film, it's the director's fault.
Sure, of course.
And it is crushing.
It is crushing. I mean, I will say, but that's, to me, like, that's the greatest challenge of a director. You talk about shepherding a film, and it's really, you're talking about so many different moving parts. You're talking about production design, performance, the technical aspect of the camera, and, the creative world that you see in your mind that you're trying to bring to life. And there's so many different aspects of it that, like, it's so important. The most difficult part of being a good director is making sure that everyone
it's completely attacking me.
Oh, I didn't see. So funny. Is keeping everybody like in the same movie. You know what I mean? Like, because a lot of times, my experience producing a feature, it was that I wrote, I had a different vision in mind for the film, that, and the director did a great job, never any shade in that way, because it was such a low budget and she did an incredible job. But it is, incredibly, because when I'm, functioning as a producer, and it was an indie producer realm. So it was, definitely,
It's a lot of hats.
It's a lot of hats. Did my own location scouting, did all, like you were mentioning it, the production manager and the coordinator at Chapman, like, that's what being an indie producer is like you have to do everything, like you're hiring everybody, you're doing all of that. And so it's so important for the director to fully, articulate their vision and trying to find the language to get it across to every single department head and every single, you know what I'm saying? It's such an important, if you don't do that correctly, the film falls to pieces. So it's,
exactly. And that's why it's such a shame that it's easy to get bogged down in the pressure of it, because, and this of course happens on the indie level too. I think the biggest thing that people aren't transparent about with film school, here's the big bombshell for everyone who hasn't looked into this stuff. The directors are responsible for paying for all the films. You get some money from school. Chapman's, this is me being real transparent now. Chapman gives $15,000, which they list on their website. Most schools list what they give on the website, but you have to, in the back of your mind, say, okay, if they're giving us $15,000, how much money am I personally going to have to be spending on this? Because it's a thesis film. The pressure to solve problems with money is immense. Yes. And it's also the easiest way sometimes to solve problems.
Yeah.
And it's financially even more stressful than some of these other factors are. And that creates a really complicated balance too. And to me, this is the thing that film schools need to change like yesterday. they need to democratize how the film budgets are being generated. It needs to be contractual, and it needs to come from the administration, because if you're just saying like, well, of course you guys can make a deal and people will chip in. No, they won't.
Yeah.
And not everyone can.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to the stress of like, you spend more than that, it's on the director. There's also the pressure of, it's not a stipend.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for that $15,000 reimbursement.
Yeah.
That fly is really in love with me. Sorry. So, and thankfully I got, my producer got a scholarship from the school towards it. We got another grant from the school towards it, and we got additional COVID money. So relatively speaking, I that filled my budget, but we shot in June, and it's now August 12th.
Yeah.
And I'm still sitting on those credit card debts.
Yeah.
And that's on top of the tuition. That's on top of the 2 cycle films that I made during my second year and my first year, which also have a reimbursement policy that's much, much smaller, because they scale the projects with you as you advance through the program. It is simultaneously like, you're your own executive producer. So, you're the final say, which, every director wants that. Every director wants final say on everything. So
but when you're a student and it's coming out of your, your pocket, everybody knows students are poor. Like,
yes.
Yes.
So it's just this extra level of stress on it. And then you add in COVID, where people haven't been working too.
Yeah.
That's a big reason why some people scaled their projects down. That was a big reason I kind of reconfigured mine, was trying to figure out how to make that 15,000 plus a little bit go as far as it possibly could.
Yeah, to make the best project you could on that budget.
Exactly.
And protocols. Yeah.
And I think the flip side of that for me, you're talking about the creative shepherding that a director does too, is I came in knowing my voice.
Yeah.
A lot of other students come in, and grad school in particular is where, on average, you're in your late 20s to early 30s in a graduate film program. Sometimes people come in a little bit younger. Sometimes people come in a little bit older, but in general, late 20s to early 30s.
Yeah.
And that's when a lot of people are figuring out who they are.
Yes, 100%.
and so it's been amazing to watch that process happen with all of my friends and my peers, because I can see the development of their voice over the last couple of years. I can see them, like, it's so exciting to see thesis films now compared to 3 years ago when we all started. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, I knew you guys had it in you. This is brilliant. Like, you can't go wrong hiring directors from our class. Truly, everyone's extremely talented. But I already knew my voice coming in. So it simplified and clarified for me how and where to spend money, how and where to, like, what baskets to put my eggs into, so to speak. I knew what my goals were, and I knew the stuff I was interested in, and I had an opinion about it. You've seen a couple of my things now. Common themes are like nostalgia, time. I mean, and growing up.
Yeah, growing
death.
Up, pets, death.
Pets, yeah. There's a lot of pets and death, actually.
But that's how that's how young people first learn about death. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I was just with some friends when I was visiting Michigan, and they are parents of one of their children is 13 and one of them is 10. They had them very young, and they don't have any pets, and they literally, while we were there, we got into the discussion of like, oh, are we doing them a disservice? Because it's such a great, it's devastating. Nobody wants a dog to die or a pet to die, but it's oftentimes how you introduce children to the idea of grief, So yeah. And both of the films that I watched 3 of your films. I'm like, wait, yeah, two of them. Yeah. Did touch on those things, but yeah, love it. Yeah.
So it kind of, it set me up to hone my skills rather than create them. And ultimately, I think going to grad school has been a massive gift I gave myself so that I could stop ADing for 3 years and just direct and finally have an outlet for everything that had kind of been brewing inside of me and that I couldn't work on because I was too busy working on other very, very good films, but I couldn't do both at the same time.
Sure.
And
it draws from your creative well. And that's like one thing that, like when you want to make the change, when you want to make the transition, it's scary because it's like, oh, but if I'm not on set and I'm not like, working on other people's projects, like what if that means then that I won't be hireable by somebody else in the future if I need it, or, all these different fears come in, but at the end of the day, like you have to stop doing it because you have to preserve your well for your projects. Yeah. You
have to really draw a line in the sand. And that doesn't mean being inflexible in the future. Like there's other departments I love. I love costume design. I love props. I love writing. There's other things that I enjoy doing in the industry. But if I don't take the time to really give 100% to writing and directing and pursuing working in episodic and pursuing the indie films that I want to make, then I'm never going to do it.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that, I'm the opposite of people in that way. Is I was very, very patient and really wanted to know as much as I could get from the industry before I made the choice to go to film school, before I made the choice to be a director. I needed to know what that job really looked like in the real world before I could say it was for me. And if there's, one piece of advice I give people when they're looking at film school is, why do you want to go?
Yeah.
And everyone's going to have a different answer. And you have to figure out if what your answer is enough for you. But if the answer is, I just finished a film program in undergrad, or I'm straight out of undergrad, or I don't know what else to do, go explore a little, get on set, go play, go get to enjoy and develop a wealth and a well, as you said, of stories. Go experience things. Don't be in such a rush and feel like you have a timeline that you need to stick to, because I really think, that's going to make it that much harder on the opposite side. If you're going to go straight from undergrad into grad school and you're going to graduate with no real world experience, that's great. If that's how you want to learn, go do it. I'm not trying to convince anyone that that's a bad thing to do, but you have to prepare yourself for the fact that you don't have real world experience in the industry yet. And how is that going to impact your next steps?
Absolutely.
And do you have if you have a kind of fragile ego and you've been to a top 10, top 15, top 5 film school, but zero industry experience, that
you might be one of those people who's like, I regret spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on my education.
So I think it's really the reason I've loved my experience so much is I knew what I was getting into. I knew why I was doing it, and I was ready to say something.
Yeah.
And if those 3 things are true for someone, go to film school. Go to film school. Yeah. And if you can figure out how to do it in a financially,
most importantly, don't drown yourself. Yeah, no, I think you just gave a lot of really practical, sound advice, because it is film school is a giant endeavor. Though you did mention something that I did want to point out about your work that I can tell you have an interest in. Like you said, you love props, you love like all those things. Those details were really fun because I'm big on that too. I'm big on production design. I love, seeing the world, and the cakes in your thesis, like the desserts are so excellent. And
it's such a great production designer in that project. He was a friend of a friend, not a Chapman student, and is also a director. And we just had a blast coming up with like fun, cartoony references for all the things that were in the fridge.
It worked perfect. And even the boxes, do you know what I mean? Like everything really solid. I can see that, I can see those details. And then in the one about Alex, what's it called? I apologize.
Sleep cycle.
Yes. And sleep cycle, which is so well done. And again, really strong performances in that one as well.
Thank you.
But those TVs and you know what I mean? Like I really noticed all those details. So, so you should keep, you know, developing or keep that signature in as you develop further in your career.
I absolutely will. I love when I watch a really well-designed film, and it just makes the world so much richer to me. And, you know, I think growing up as an only child, like I cultivated a very vivid imagination. And a lot of times when I'm writing, I didn't write Sleep Cycle. My wonderful writer from Chapman, Maggie, did. But she did it based off of a pilot of mine. And so it was really cool to see how that all kind of came together from in my brain and in her brain, and a great production designer from outside of Chapman came in, but everything that we used in that film other than the medical supplies were from our Chapman prop house, which is another really handy free resource. You know, that's something I will say about the benefits of film school, especially somewhere like Chapman, who continues to invest in their resources for students, whether it's technology. I shot my thesis film on a red Gemini.
That's amazing,
we have multiple stages. We have this enormous prop house. They're building an enormous costume warehouse now too. So those resources, if you know how to use them, like it's been a pretty cool little playground to have for 3 years for sure.
Absolutely. And so on that note, as you wrapped, you know, as you have 11 days left to get your thesis turned in, what's next for you? Do you know the project that you're aiming to do next? Are you remaining open? Are you waiting to just get through this? Are you not bogging yourself down? Like what's next?
I have gotten to the point where I've definitely been thinking about it, and my pragmatic nature is always going to overrule what my plans are. The fun plans are. So I kind of have my poker going into a couple different fires right now.
Cool.
I'm open to doing things like being a director's assistant for someone, you know, that's got a high profile and has the experience. That would be like amazing to shadow and learn from and follow. I really want to start making inroads into working into episodic because I love TV so much. And then my feature is I'm almost done with a draft of it.
Beautiful.
And it's a very personal story that I want to tell with a weird splash of comedy in it as well. It's about a high schooler who has ADHD, but she's undiagnosed. She has no idea she has it. Nobody else knows she has it. And she is thrust into having to make a movie over summer because she's flunked her English class and she has to make up the credit. And if she doesn't, then they're going to not let her graduate. So she turns her English project into a horror movie retelling of Hamlet.
Love it. Yeah.
And it's almost Famous meets Legally Blonde is I think the best way to describe it.
I love that. I get the Legally Blonde reference and that it's, you know, taking what could be construed at life handing you lemons and turning it into lemonade, you know, like thinking that it's a weakness, but really recognizing and learning that it's a strength, which is always a really beautiful message. So
absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of early 2000s nostalgia, since that's when I was in high school. And I love the indie film of that era. And that's definitely where a lot of the Almost Famous influence comes in. Is I'm populating it with some of my heroes from when I was a teenager, and we'll see what happens with it, but I'm gonna try and go big on it.
Love it. Do it.
Low budget, but big ideas.
Sure. There you go. Low budget, big ideas. I think that's a good mantra for anybody in film. Like, well, beautiful. This was so lovely, Danni. Thank you so much for coming on. I don't know if you have your films available for anybody to see publicly.
Heads, Tails, and Sleep Cycle are both available publicly. They had short festival runs. I'm not super into the whole festival game. It feels like playing the lottery. So those are both available, and we can link those. And then sometime in the future, I'm sure I'll be able to share a thesis with the world as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll definitely include those links. I wasn't sure if they were private.
Yeah.
I will definitely include those links then with the episode description, and then people can find you on Twitter at.
Yes. On Twitter, I'm at Stanislaus Films, Stanislaus Films. And on Instagram, I have also at Stanislaus Films. And then my private page, which is mostly where I post film stuff, is Dammit, DAMNIT_Danny.
Love it. Damn it, Danny. That's great.
I heard it a lot as a PA, so it just kind of stuck.
It works. I like it. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. This was so lovely to chat with you. And I really think this is going to be such a fun episode for people to listen to.
Thank you so much, Heather. It was really fun to talk and share these stories. And I hope that it opens people's eyes to some lesser considered elements of film school.
Yeah. And especially just what you talked about in terms of how it's evolved as a result of the pandemic. And
yeah, absolutely.
I feel like people might be more now they'll be more able to do it from anywhere in the world, be in a good program. So that's
absolutely,
that's great. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.